Welcome to all.
Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. I did a lot of theater in this community and a lot of presentations, but I don't have that opportunity nearly as much as I used to. So I really like the opportunity. I know that many of you know that Jenny and I recently did an all presentation about finding joy during the process of dying. And since I was asked to do one on my own, I started thinking about how many poets over the centuries have explored this most universal of human experiences. A lot of them, as you'll find out maybe later on, probably focus on that more than anything else, the mortality that we share. I have to confess right off the bat that I fancy myself a wannabe poet, and I published a book of my attempts titled Truths, Lies, and Best Guesses. So I'm going to get my addition to today's offerings over right away. That book of poetry contains 4 songs for my father. I'll read one of the 4. One I wrote in the early 70s after I saw my father in the hospital after his first heart attack. He lived for some months after, but seeing him there, so frail, this man who had been for me a tree to lean against all my 30-some years, and here he lay hooked up to machines, patches of bruises all over his arms from a fall. And I just wished him a gentle death and used the metaphor of a tree to do so. Father 1. Why cling to this last dry, crinkly leaf? It looks so foolish hanging there asleep, a gesture incomplete. Why not let the leaf fall, old man? What vanity to stand there stark and lonely, all dead memories whispering against your feet, all forgotten dreams long ago sent spinning to the earth, and yet this one dead hope between your fingers still. Let it fall, old, dear old man, and go to sleep. Okay, that's all from this poet, I promise. Carl Sandburg wrote Grass in 1917, one of his best-known poems, and a theme that he wrote about often, which was the death of soldiers on the battlefields. Pile the bodies high at Austerlitz and Waterloo, shovel them under and let me work. I am the grass, I cover all. And pile them high at Gettysburg, and pile them high at Ypres and Verdun. Shovel them under and let me work. 2 years, 10 years, and passengers ask the conductor, what place is this? Where are we now? I am the grass. Let me work. In 1921, Sandburg wrote 4 preludes on Playthings of the Wind. I'm reading number 1 and 3 because they're so appropriate for this time, this country, this people. Sandburg recognized, as we all must, that not just people, but cultures, species, countries and civilizations, they die too. Prelude 1. The doors were cedar, and the panels strips of gold, and the girls were golden girls, and the panels red, and the girls chanted, "We are the greatest city, the greatest nation, nothing like us ever was." The doors are twisted on broken hinges. Sheets of rain swished through the wind where the golden girls ran and the panels read, "We are the greatest city, the greatest nation, nothing like us ever was." Prelude 3. It has happened before. Strong men put up a city and got a nation together, and paid singers to sing and women to warble. "We are the greatest city, the greatest nation, nothing like us ever was." And while the singers sang and the strong men listened and paid the singers well and felt good about it all, there were rats and lizards who listened. And the only listeners left now are the rats and the lizards. And there are black crows crying, "Caw, caw," bringing mud and sticks, building a nest over the words carved on the doors where the panels were cedar, and the strips on the panels were gold, and the golden girls came singing, "We are the greatest city, the greatest nation, nothing like us ever was." The only singers now are crows crying, "Caw, caw," and the sheets of rain whine in the wind and doorways, and the only listeners now are the rats and the lizards. But death comes not just to you and I and countries and stars and planets. It comes to little things too. The Mower by Philip Larkin. The mower stalled twice. Kneeling, I found a hedgehog jammed up against the blades, killed. It had been in the long grass. I had seen it before and even fed it once. Now I had mauled its unobtrusive world unmendably. Burial was no help. Next morning I got up and it did not. The first day after a death, the new absence is always the same. We should be careful of each other. We should be kind while there is still time. So, Fred Rogers, right, who said there are 3 things you should do to lead a good life. Number 1, be kind. Number 2, be kind. Number 3, be kind. This next poem is probably the classic sonnet on this subject. "Death, Be Not Proud" by John Donne, written in 1633. "Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou think'st thou dost overthrow die not, poor Death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow. and soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls' delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell, and poppy or charms can make us sleep as well. And better than thy stroke, why swellest thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. This poem was written by Yehuda Levi, who was a Spanish Jew who lived from 1075 to 1141. He was a physician and a poet and philosopher. It's titled, "'Tis a Fearful Thing." 'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, to hope, to dream, to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools, this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing, to love what death has touched. Ellen Bass lives in Santa Cruz. She is the chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. The Thing is the title of her poem. The thing is to love life, to love it, even when you have no stomach for it, and everything you've held dear crumbles like burnt paper in your hands, your throat filled with the silt of it. When grief sits with you, its tropical heat thickening the air, heavy as water, more fit for gills than lungs. When grief weighs you like your own flesh, only more of it, an obesity of grief. You think, how can a body withstand this? Then you hold life like a face between your palms, a plain face, no charming smile, no violet eyes, and you say, yes, I will take you. I will love you again. Luther F. Beecher is a poet who lived for 90 years in the 19th century. His poem, The Sailing Ship, is his explanation for death. And I've used this image in a number of funerals without knowing who originally wrote it. So, The Sailing Ship. What is dying? I am standing on the seashore. A ship sails to the morning breeze and starts for the ocean. She is an object, and I stand watching her till at last she fades from the horizon, and someone at my side says, she is gone. Gone where? Gone from my sight, that is all. She is just as large in the mast's hull and spars as she was when I saw her, and just as able to bear her load of living freight to the destination. The diminished size and total loss of sight is in me, not in her. And just at the moment when someone by my side says, she is gone, there are others who are watching her coming. And other voices take up a glad shout, "Here she comes!" And that is dying. Now, one of my personal favorite poems and poet, Dylan Thomas. Born in 1914, he dropped out of school at 16, became a reporter, and by 18 he decided to concentrate on his poetry full time. He wrote nearly half of his poetry in his teens. He recorded radio shows and he experimented with characters and ideas that would later appear in his poetic radio play Under Milkwood, which I produced at Thunder Bay Theater in 1987. In 1950, he did the first of 4 reading tours of the United States. And Thomas was very theatrical. He engaged in roaring disputes in public and read his work aloud with tremendous depth of feeling. And those recordings are still available. I remember listening to them when I was at Central 60 years ago. During his last tour of the United States, he collapsed after a long drinking bout at the White Horse Tavern, and in 1953, he died at the age of 39. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. The wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning. They do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now. With your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. This following poem is really a short story. It was written by Edgar Allan Poe, who in a number of poems throughout his lifetime wrote about the loss of a lady named Lenore, the Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Distinctly, I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating service at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is and nothing more." Presently, my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," cried I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then where that it is, and this mystery explore. Let my see then what thereat is. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with a mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my said fancy into smiling by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, "Though the rest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further then he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and beast and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he has sent thee respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh, quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land undaunted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word or sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Israel's most famous modern poet died 20 years ago. Yehuda Amichai wrote a poem called A Man in His Life. A man in his life has no time to have time for everything. He has no room to have room for every desire. Ecclesiastes was wrong to claim that. A man has to hate and love all at once, with the same eyes to cry and to laugh, with the same hands to throw stones and to gather them, make love in war and war in love. And hate and forgive and remember and forget and order and confuse and eat and digest. What long history does in so many ways. A man in his life has no time. When he loses, he seeks. When he finds, he forgets. When he forgets, he loves. When he loves, he begins forgetting. And his soul is knowing and very professional. Only his body remains an amateur always. It tries and fumbles. He doesn't learn and get confused, drunk and blind in his pleasures and pains. In autumn, he will die like a fig, shriveled, sweet, full of himself. The leaves dry out on the ground, and the naked branches point to the place where there is time for everything. Maxine Beneba Clark is an Australian of Caribbean descent who wrote poetry and fiction and nonfiction and is obviously really up to date, because this poem is called Generation Zoom. In the third week of the pandemic, schools started closing, workers were sent home, and they started to call the youngsters Generation Zoom. Named, of course, for that chat app all of them seem to use, logging in for FaceTime, completing math lessons online, dancing TikTok feeds on loop, clicking into Insta News, and everyone was asking, what on earth will become of WhatsApp's children? Visiting friends through cracked phone glass, and advised to stay away from their own mama's arms who weren't allowed to touch, because don't you know there's a virus going around, and less is love, baby. Less is love parented from 1.5 meters away. What hope the future when a whole generation grew up this way, socially distant, quarantined and self-isolated, no giggly schoolgirl notes tucked into the pockets of square-check tunics, nor the exquisite stomach churns you used to get when someone you liked stood close to you. But Generation Zoom, they saw the neighbors from 2 doors down put a note in their letterbox asking if they still had food. Generation Zoom streamed bitter fights in supermarket aisles over toilet paper and baked beans. But they also saw us learn how to grow the world from seed, how the cities silent were so beautiful, how for the first time in so long, Dad was home, and he vacuumed and forgot to act like dinner was his due, and all the family were on the same time frame in the same house, defrosting bolognese and bickering and bunking. And Elijah's boyfriend was finally allowed to phone, even though Mom was still confused about the whole gay thing. Because don't you know there's a pandemic going on? And love is love, Ma. Love is love. In the end, we'll be okay. 'cause generations Zoom grew up this way. Learning stocks can be lost as fast as accumulated, that health is wealth, and love is gold, and life will find a way. Izzy Roberts Orr is from Melbourne, and one time read a poem by Adrian Rich called What Kind of Times Are These? And he reacted particularly to this phrase, in times like these, to have you listen at all, it's necessary to talk about trees. So Izzy wrote this poem, Trees Like These. I know where all the best trees in my neighborhood are, and I circle the block nodding at them, and they nod back at me, gum leaves hopping in the breeze. Your doom clock does not touch the trees. That is a lie, of course it does. Touches everything. But maybe it does not touch the trees in the same way. Every story of a tree dying is a story of our own slow dying. Still, they grow in impossible places. Still, they make new leaves and shed them again. Still, somehow, miraculously, they talk to each other. Microcorzyl networks mapping where the good sun shines, sending sugar along for those they love. Still, they make room for bees and clutch gently the swift wattle birds and take the sun's rays and turn them green with chlorophyll and take the dead air from your lungs and let you breathe again. Evan Boland's an Irish poet and author and professor at Stanford University who died just 2 months ago and wrote a poem called Quarantine. In the worst hour of the worst season of the worst year of a whole people, a man set out from the workhouse with his wife. He was walking, they both were walking north. She was sick with famine fever and could not keep up. He lifted her and put her on his back. He walked like that, west and north, until at nightfall under freezing stars they arrived. In the morning they were both found dead, of cold, of hunger, of the toxins of a whole history. But her feet were held against his breastbone. The last heat of his flesh was his last gift to her. Let no love poem ever come to this threshold. There is no place here for the inexact praise of the easy graces and sensuality of the body. There is only time for this merciless inventory. Their death together in the winter of 1847, also what they suffered, how they lived, and what there is between a man and woman, and in which darkness it can best be proved. I love that image of the feet held up against his breast. Here's one by Robert Frost called Out, Out. The buzzsaw snarled and rattled in the yard and made dust and dropped stove-length sticks of wood, sweet-scented stuff when the breeze drew across it. And from there, those that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other under the sunset far into Vermont. And the saw snarled and rattled as it ran light or had to bear a load. And nothing happened. Day was all but done. Call it a day. I wish they might have said, to please the boy by giving him the half hour that a boy counts so much when saved from work. His sister stood beside him in her apron to tell them, "Supper!" At the word, the saw, as if to prove saws know what supper meant, leaped out at the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given the hand. However it was, neither refused the meeting, but the hand. The boy's first outcry was a rueful laugh as he swung toward them, holding up the hand, half in appeal, but half as if to keep the life from spilling. Then the boy saw all, since he was old enough to know, big boy, doing a man's work, though a child at heart. He saw all spoiled. "Don't let them cut my hand off. The doctor, when he comes, don't let him, sister." So, but the hand was gone already. The doctor put him in the dark of ether. He lay and puffed his lips out with his breath, and then the watcher at his pulse took fright. No one believed. They listened at his heart, little less, nothing. And that ended it. No more to build on there. And they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs. This is a poem called One Art by Elizabeth Bishop, who's a poet and short story writer. She was born in 1911, was fairly obscure but in her lifetime, but is celebrated now as a major poet. One Art. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I own, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. Okay, I'd like to conclude with a poem, sort of song that I used to sing quite often. It was first introduced by Louis Armstrong in 28 and Cab Calloway in 33. So, folks, I'm going down to St. James Infirmary, see my baby there. She's stretched out on a long white table. She's so sweet, so cold, so fair. Let it go, God bless her, wherever she may be. She will search this whole wide world over, but she'll never find another sweet man like me. When I die, bury me in my straight-leg breeches. Put on a box-back coat and a Stetson hat. Put a $20 gold piece on my watch chain so you can let all the boys know I died standing and pat. And give me 6 crap-shooting pallbearers. Let a chorus girl sing me a song. Put a red-hot jazz band at the top of my head so we can raise hallelujah as we go along. Folks, now that you've heard my story, say, boy, hand me another shot of that booze. If anyone should ask you, you just tell them I've got those St. James Infirmary blues. And there you go. So, if there are any questions or anything, I'd be glad to respond to anybody. But thank you. I thank you for showing up, and I thank you for the opportunity that all occasionally has allowed me to do presentations.
Keith from Association of Lifelong Learners, thank you very much. Is there a question out there? Any questions for Keith? Comments?
Yeah, this is Reverend Lance of First Congregational. Thank you for discovering that Generation Zoom and the times like these, those unusual poems that I had not heard before, but are very much relevant to today's experience. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Any other questions for Keith? Comments? Well, Keith, we very much appreciate you bringing this poetry read to us. I found it very insightful, thoughtful pieces of work. Thank you.
You bet. My pleasure.
Well, I guess if Keith, do you have any parting words?
No, have a good day.
Thank you. You too. And
Hey, Keith, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you, Bob.
With that, we will be signing the meeting off. Thanks for everyone attending.